Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Kemper, and my art business's name is Field Guide Embroidery, and I design and create hand embroidery pieces inspired by nature and especially wildlife. So a little bit of background information about me. I grew up in Wisconsin. I have degrees in horticulture and environmental studies from UW-Madison. Shortly after graduating, I moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, where I worked at a bird zoo. Picture me holding a pelican. And I also worked at the University of Utah in food insecurity. While living there, I got to participate as a citizen scientist in a few research-based projects in that area with conservation nonprofits. I picked up wildlife photography as a hobby, and I now have a wide variety of photos of animals. But it's hard when you're living out west and you see a big moose or a grizzly bear. You want to take a picture of it. And then, of course, fiber arts. I love to sew quilts, crochet, knit, and, of course, embroider. And this is a picture of my family. We now live in Atlanta. I've lived there for about 2 years with my husband and our 2 cute rescue dogs, Phoebe and Pickle June. How embroidery started for me. So I started to learn basic embroidery stitches in March 2020 when everyone was looking for a hobby to kind of keep our minds busy and off of all the scary things happening in the world. I had a book from the library where I learned stitches and I completed 2 or 3 patterns, and then I decided it was time for me to design my own. So this is the first pattern on the left here. It's a cutthroat trout that I designed and stitched. And later that mountain lion on a flannel shirt. I liked to collect flannel shirts that had a lot of life left and were of quality from friends or later from the thrift store, stitch something really awesome on them, and then share them on my social media accounts. And soon after doing that, I was approached by folks who wanted to buy my work, which was really exciting. So I attended my first in-person market. There's my booth. This was a very popular market in Salt Lake City at the time. People would line up around the block and wait for the doors to open. And when they did, people would literally run to the artist booth to buy what they wanted. And as a new artist, people were just flying past my booth, and I was so nervous about it. But I watched someone look over, and their eyes were caught by this blue shirt at the front of my booth. It had a mountain goat stitched on it, and she came over, she tried it on, she loved it and bought it. And in that process, she shared with me a really amazing story of hiking with her family and seeing mountain goats at the peak. So this was really eye-opening for me to be able to connect with essentially a stranger over something that I made on a really personal level. So this gave me pause, made me take a step back and think about how my work can greater represent activism, emotion, and storytelling. And it brought me to this notion of eco-grief, which I define as grief that you feel when thinking about the future of the environment. So working as a sustainability professional and with my background in environmental studies, I was confronted daily about big catastrophes that we may endure in our lifetime. Water conservation issues in the West, wildfires, population decline of wildlife, and policies that maybe weren't helping or were being taken away that were helping. So I made this piece. It is called The Big Nothing, and it is that's a term coined by developers in the West looking to acquire big swaths of sagebrush steppe habitat. And when you're standing really far away from it, or maybe in an airplane, it really does look like a big sea of sage and maybe not much else. But when you look a little bit closer, you will find several species that rely very heavily on this habitat, sometimes solely. So to contradict that term and to use my eco-grief as a motivator, I stitched this piece and it made it into several art shows. It hung in the Moab airport for a year and won a few art contests. That was very exciting for me because when I think of art shows, I think of paintings and sculptures. I was the only fiber artist included in the show, and that was really awesome for me, and it gave me a lot of motivation to keep going and to further share stories with my work. So this series of hats that I made I call them the scenic species, and each hat represents a story, a really core memory for me of seeing wildlife in nature. So for example, a bison in front of Old Faithful in Yellowstone as it's erupting, or a kit fox in Death Valley, or a black bear on the Appalachian Trail. And people loved these. They loved the stories and the emotion behind it, so I opened up the storytelling to my followers on social media. I created a form where people could submit their own stories. These were really popular with wildlife biologists, people who are dedicating their lives to certain species, like walleyes or hawks. The stories were beautiful. A lot of them brought me to tears, and this was just a really great community building project that I put together. And I try to challenge myself to have my work represent other ideas as well. This series of hats on the left were based from a scientific journal where a scientist followed around larger mammals that often consume fruit to see if the seeds were viable, and we could call these species seed dispersers in the way that we do often birds or smaller mammals. The series on the right was inspired by the most recent presidential election. Keywords that were popping up that I saw frequently, or emotions that I had been feeling. So each hat has a plant and an animal partnered on it. For example, the angry grizzly bear and the stinging nettle was rage. The Canadian geese and the sagebrush was community. The howling wolf and the bristlecone pine was resilience, and so on. So in my work,
Can you speak into the mic?
yes, thank you. So I've continued to try to build a community that I started in Salt Lake and now in Atlanta. I teach several classes at art centers in Atlanta. I attend markets when I'm able to, and a portion of every single sale I make goes back to a wildlife conservation agency doing the conservation and doing the real work out there. And it also ultimately inspired me to write a book. It is called The Field Guide to Embroidery, and it contains 52 patterns of wildlife species or plants native to North America. There are 7 chapters based on ecosystems around us: ocean, waterways, prairie, mountain, forest, and urban. So I really wanted to inspire my followers and other people who may just come across my book to confront their own eco-grief, stitch their own stories, and remember that these joyful things exist in our world even when it sometimes feels really hard. In this photo on your left was all of the example work that I sent into my publisher to photograph. I didn't know what to do with all of them when I got them back, so I stitched them into a quilt that hangs in my living room now, and it's really beautiful. Each one is bordered by a corresponding color to the chapter in the book. And a big part of the book as well is to challenge readers to pick something that's already in their wardrobe, going back to that notion of sustainability. So that was really fast. I know I talked really fast. I would love to continue to be friends. This QR code will take you to my Instagram page, and I also have a website. I'd love to hear about your work and your wildlife stories. Thank you very much for having me.
So, good afternoon. My name's Jen Odie, and I'm from Wytheville, Virginia. When I was notified that I would be speaking to you all today, I was sent a YouTube link to a video that showed last year's emerging artist presentations. I noticed that most of the presenters were very young, many of them fresh out of college. When I mentioned this to my husband, he chuckled and asked me what I planned to talk about, as I'm no longer in my 20s or my 30s, and I'm swiftly approaching the end of my 40s. I told him that I would take this opportunity to remind people in the room that at any age you can decide to try something new, something that can change the course of your art and how you make it or why you make it. In January, I will be 50 years old. It dawned on me these last few weeks as I've been preparing for today that I have been reinventing myself and reemerging as a new iteration of myself my whole adult life. In many areas of my life where I've identified with being on a particular path, that path has evolved, grown, changed directions, and sometimes ended for one reason or another. I'm here to speak a bit about my journey as a creative. In these slides, you will see glimpses of my paintings, drawings, photographs, and my pottery. Growing up in Southwest Virginia, I learned at a young age about plants and animals living among the mountains from my family, learning how to hunt, forage, grow and preserve food, This way of life shaped me as a young person, and although I took it for granted at the time, it has played an important role in my life's journey and has found its way into my artwork that I make. As a child, I began drawing all the time. I learned how to paint from my mother's best friend at the age of 11. From that time, I've continued to paint. It is my constant. Over the course of my life, I have worked to make my work more meaningful. This has been an ongoing theme in how and why I make what I make. In the fall of 1995, I started college at Virginia Tech's School of Architecture. Students in the department at that time had access to several kinds of arts and crafts studios within the college: photography darkrooms, woodworking and metalworking studios, a printmaking studio, and a pottery studio. There were classes taught within the department to familiarize students with materials, equipment, and processes, as well as techniques. It was a dream most days to be there and to have access to so much creative opportunity. During my time at school, I kept painting, working on one painting at a time at my studio desk to keep my creativity alive when burnout would start to set in at the end of each semester. I took my first pottery classes during this time. I gave the wheel a whirl and learned slip casting processes and hand building techniques. My favorite way to work with clay was with slabs. It still is. The instructor we had at the architecture school was very critical, and in some instances, they were discouraging. I left that experience not sure I would ever touch clay again. It just wasn't a media that I was good at. Once I left school, I didn't touch clay for 20 years. The summer before my thesis year of college, I moved to New Mexico for an architectural internship. I loved it there. While living there, I had an opportunity to visit a multitude of arts and crafts studios all over Lincoln County. People were creating amazing pieces. Their work was deeply rooted in a sense of place, and many of the artisans' work told a story about the person who made it and the place where it was created. It was then that I realized that my own art lacked emotional depth and connection. I wanted for people to connect it with the place where it was created and the human, just being human. At the end of the summer, I returned to school and began to try new ways of expressing myself through paint. Most of my work took items from nature and portrayed them from a macroscopic lens, creating images of them exponentially larger. This was when I began to look closer at the natural world around me. I realized that I had taken that world for granted experientially because it was so familiar. I had grown up in that world and hadn't really seen it. I began to see it with new eyes. It wasn't until I moved to Alaska for my first architectural job that I truly found myself in my artwork. Sometimes I think you have to remove yourself from everything you know to really see who you are and how you perceive the world and why it appears to you in the way that it does. Alaska was like being on another planet. I arrived there as an Appalachian mountain girl from Southwest Virginia, anxious, excited, and ready to experience the unknown. It was the first week after I arrived that I painted a piece that reflected about how I was feeling about the move. It was the first, my connection with oneness that exists no matter where I am, whether it's in the Appalachian Mountains of Southwest Virginia, the white sands of New Mexico, the Chugach Range of mountains overlooking the Cook Inlet outside of Anchorage, or eating wild blueberries on Murphy Dome on a cool end of summer day in Fairbanks. Over the 10 years I was there, I found out so much about myself, my strengths, my shortcomings, where I was in my internal landscape, and where I wanted to be. My work had more meaning, but still I wanted more. I started therapy while living in Fairbanks. I had some things to take care of, as we all do. I eventually moved back to Virginia to dig deeper. The choice to start counseling changed the way that I approached my work. It became more emotional, more personal. My therapist challenged me to use my art as a means to go deeper. It was then that I woke up to the fact that the thing standing between me and finding deeper meaning in my art was me. I was terrified of what it might show me. It took some time, but I got there. This challenge fueled the next evolution of my work. It was deeper emotionally and riskier and looser in technique. It was just what I needed to expose the hurt I was healing. It gave me a chance to look at it outside myself, to shed light on my darkness, exposing it all. There was a fluidity that had not been there before, as the images that revealed themselves to me emerged from the darkness. After spending those years working on my healing, I felt more free. I felt more open to new people and group experiences. It was at that time that I opened my own art studio and began teaching lessons to kids and adults. During that time, I was approached by a friend who wanted to teach pottery classes. So when the opportunity struck, I took part in a small business grant competition our town was hosting. I ended up being one of the grant recipients. The first 2 years we hosted pottery classes, I never touched clay or the equipment. I just kept painting. Truly, I was mentally blocked from working with the equipment. I did not want to touch clay. That cool, clammy texture felt like failure to me. More than anything, I did not want anyone else to see what I would make. Those thoughts and feelings stemmed from my experience from my college instructor 25 years prior and trauma that I had endured as a young person. Then the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and my studio had to close its doors to students. Along with the emotional roller coaster that came with the pandemic, I was totally burned out from commissioned paintings I had to work on. So I took on some things I had no experience with at all. One of those was mural painting, and the other was pottery. I dove deep into the clay that summer. I made pottery nearly every day. I'm sure you're wondering how I got over those feelings of self-doubt. I think that closing the studio doors to people outside my immediate family made the space feel safe. It gave me the privacy to try and fail. Sometimes I think that making pottery saved my sanity during that time. I was obsessed. I also started spending even more time out in the woods. My interest in learning about native plants and animals really peaked during this time, and I started documenting what I was running into in the woods in pen and ink. Once I got comfortable with the clay, I started trying out new things. I watched videos and took risks. I tried out ideas that would pop into my head. Some of them worked and a lot of them failed. I took classes once the shutdown ended, one of which connected me with my mentors, Harry and Julie Hearn. They helped me to grow as a potter and instilled in me the courage to apply for shows that I thought were out of my reach, as well as to apply for the jury process for the Southern Highland Craft Guild. Their belief in me in many ways has been healing and transformative. The act of making pottery has helped me grow as an artist and maker in ways I could never have imagined. I've learned a lot about letting go of attachment to outcomes, and that you can't force things to be and do what you want them to be and do. Sometimes they just are what they are, and you have to accept it and move forward. I continue to learn from the process of making objects out of clay, both in the physical realm as well as in my internal world. My artwork is the combination of all the things I have done before. Every iteration along the way has been the combined effort of the steps that came before, bringing me to right now, over and over and over again. Thank you for having me come today. I really appreciate it.
And I am fresh out of college. Today we're going to explore my work, which is about body and gender identity. I use they, he, she pronouns. I identify as gender fluid, and it is the basis of a lot of my work. So I decided to just pull 2 quotes from my artist statement that I feel embody my work now and also where it's heading, or at least the hopes of where it's heading. The first quote is, "As a maker, I enjoy exploring traditional craft processes and using them to express my experiences as a queer individual." And the second quote is, "I like experimenting with adjustable wearables that contain illustrative elements to reclaim negative experiences and create pieces that represent queer bodies as sacred." I feel like this subject is very important right now because there's a lot of propaganda about what gender looks like on people, and it's just a really good thing to talk about because gender has always been fluid. Sex is something that is assigned at birth, and those 2 things often cross into confusion about why people express themselves in certain ways. And as somebody who is gender fluid, I feel it's important to use my artwork and my voice to help people understand that gender identity is a sacred thing. So I'm going to show you a few pieces from my BFA program that I made. I graduated this December with my BFA in metalwork from Appalachian State University and with a minor in dance. This first piece is called parada, which means pairing of 2 in French, and it is a term used in ballet to talk about a dance between a man and a woman specifically. I grew up dancing, and dance is a very gendered thing, especially when it is something like ballet. And so I decided to make a piece. This is a 2-piece series. There's a hair piece that goes with it, but it's the same forms. And it is essentially like one person, but there's still a man and a woman splitting out. And this is the first piece I made when I actually discovered what gender fluidity was, and it kind of clicked a lot of boxes for me as a person. And so I wanted to start making work about this. Inside of it are these kind of more fluid person forms, and it is a theme in a lot of my work. This next piece is more of a technical exercise I made, and it is a pin container. So it's more of a tool that dancers can use, and it is essentially like a copper tube that I split on a lathe, and I put threads inside, and I fabricated all of these extra things on it. And one half you can actually put hairpins in, and the other half you can put bobby pins in. And so it's kind of like a more utilitarian object, but it is definitely has some of those themes I was talking about earlier as well. This next piece is part of a 3-piece series, and this is about my experience as a gender fluid person inside of a female body. There is a piece that is a waist harness, and I couldn't get a great photo to show the whole thing because it's pretty long, but it was actually featured in New York City Jewelry Week this past fall with an organization called Queer Metalsmiths. And so these pieces were very emotional and hard to make. It was the first time I was really recognizing, like, I do identify as this, and also trying to work through the gaslighting myself about my identity at the time. And it was really therapeutic to make work about my experiences. This next piece is just a more fun one. If you've ever seen the show The Last of Us, I made a piece about this show, and it's essentially this like zombie fungus that infects humans. But I made this in a class, and at this time I was like, okay, so I have enameling skills, I have some fabrication skills and some chain making skills. I want to try to like make a piece that actually combines all of my skills. And so I made this piece. I think that there's still a lot to grow from it in terms of form, but it was kind of the first piece I tried to merge multiple processes into one. This next piece is called Angler, and it is a teapot, but I took the more sculptural approach. It was a found object project where you had to find something for the handle, so I found this whale tail bottle opener. So it's more of a bottle opener than an actual teapot. And I formed this very nautical, deep sea looking vessel, and I felt that this piece was a turning point for me because I struggled to get pieces off the ground, and they were pretty flat and layering sheet metal. But this, I felt like I was actually able to make more complex forms that were interesting to look at. And I also have been drawing my whole life, so it felt like I actually gave myself permission to include my illustrations into my metalwork, because there was a time where I kind of felt like I had to focus on the fabrication before I could put my personal design into my pieces. So this is part 1 of a 3-piece series, which was my BFA studio final. I decided to move away from talking about my gender identity for this because it's a very sensitive subject matter and a lot of people are going to be viewing this work. And so I kind of just went back to kind of the processes and inspired by that teapot. And so this is a series about humans looking into nature and feeling uncomfortable by its confrontation and power. And so this is a personal experience where I was swimming in the ocean, and I looked down and I was expecting to see fish, and I saw ocean, which sucked because there wasn't anything underneath me. So I made a series of masks. So this one there's a charcoal illustration I did of somebody falling in the ocean. I riveted grommets onto this corn fiber I found, and then I welded the stands together, and then I also made the mask and fabricated, and I was able to incorporate enameling and forming and different processes I had learned while I was at school. This is the second piece of the series called Stare Back, and it's that feeling, especially when moving to Appalachia for school, I was like, wow, there's some power in these woods when you stare into it. It feels like you're not supposed to look at it. So this is to capture that feeling. Next piece is called Last Light, and it's about the unknowns of death. And ultimately, I was very happy about these pieces. I felt like it was a great technical exercise and a great way to end, especially because of the hurricane. I lost a lot of time in the studio, and at the time, we were also doing under building renovation, so we also just had a lot of displacement. So my studio space was very iffy constantly throughout the semester. So aside from my work in school And entering school during the pandemic and also the building renovation, many external factors prohibited my ability to have a smooth, easy access to studio. So I decided to pursue education that was extracurricular, so I got into the world of craft schools more about 2 years ago, but especially the last year, I've attended a few. So here are just a few pieces that I've made. This first piece is called One Size Fits All. I did a solo exhibition this past October at my school's gallery, and it explores my gender identity through my experiences as a dancer. And so this piece is made from window screen mesh, and if you take like a really low grade like butane torch, you can kind of do these really amazing patterns just by heat patina. And I made this kind of tutu out of bronze mesh. And it's kind of representing dances that I've done as a child or growing up dancing that are faded from my memory. Dance is really beautiful because it's a purely ephemeral art form. And so I thought that making things out of wire mesh was a great way to represent dance because it's faded, but it happened and you know it happened. You just have these skeletal forms in your brain. I actually got to return to Aramont School of Crafts. This is where I made this at last spring. And I was there 2 weeks ago for their Pentaculum residency, where I made a part 2 to this, specifically about gender and which bathroom people use. It's a pajama set, and it was actually the first piece of clothing I was dress coded in as a child. That piece is not edited yet, but once it's edited, go check it out on my Instagram. So this next piece is called Preserved Rose. I did a residency, my first like big person residency at Pocosin Arts down on the coast of North Carolina this winter for 2 weeks. And I decided I wanted to focus more on technique since I felt like in school I was just trying to put as much work out as I could, and so I thought this was a great time to like really focus in on some skills. So I decided to work a little smaller and make some more jewelry pieces. So this is one of these pieces. This is a chain I made. I like working with like conventional jewelry materials like steel and brass, and it's kind of also a metaphor for genderqueer people. At least that's how I feel. They're not always the most desirable people to the public, but they are valuable and truly beautiful if you actually spend the time to get to know their experience and stories. And this is just another piece I made at the time. And then lastly, I got to go to John C. Campbell Folk School this winter for their work study program, and so I decided to take the opportunity to take mediums I'd never taken before. So this was some utensils I made in a wood utensils for cooking and eating class. This is a mask. It's an anglerfish, and I took it from a Cherokee mask carver, and essentially he gave us a block of just a stump and went around and helped us carve whatever we wanted. So that was really fun. I took an Appalachian broom making class, which was amazing because it was like a craft that I actually liked doing that didn't require a whole studio. So this is kind of what I've been doing for fun. So here are just a couple brooms I made. And then lastly, I got to take an enameling class again, and I've been doing enameling and I really enjoy it, but I think you can get really pristine with enamel or like very loose with it. And so I got to take the time to like really learn about how to use enamel intentionally and also have fun with different methods like liquid enamel and sifting and sgraffito, just different methods. And this last piece, it's a cloisonne that's more detailed. It depicts a house in the mountains with a flood, and this is the last piece I've made. I finished this 2 days ago. I returned to John Campbell for a workshop class, and it is about Helene and my experience. And yeah, so that's my work. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to keep up with me, this is my social media. If you'd like a resume from me, I printed some off. I'm trying to move to the DC, Baltimore area, so if you have connections or you are a connection, let me know. But thank you so much.